Inside Florida State Prison, death row and execution chamber. The place where sentences end. Hidden deep in rural North Florida, far from the beaches, theme parks, and tourist crowds, sits one of the most secretive and controversial institutions in the United States. Florida State Prison. A place where the state carries out its most final punishment. This is not just another maximum security facility. This is where Florida houses many of its condemned inmates, and where executions are carried out either by lethal injection or, in the past and under specific circumstances, the electric chair. For decades, this prison has operated largely out of public view. The walls are high. The security is layered. And what happens inside, especially on death row, is tightly controlled, documented, but rarely seen. Today, we take you inside. Not through rumors. Not through exaggeration. But through verified records, official procedures, and documented history, revealing what life is really like on Florida's death row, and what happens in the final hours before an execution. Because inside this prison, time doesn't just pass. For some, it runs out.
Before we dive into today's powerful story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more gripping tales. Your support helps us keep sharing these stories, and we wouldn't want you to miss any of the action. Now, let's get started.
Where is Florida State Prison? Florida State Prison is located near the small town of Rayford, in Union County, Florida. It's a rural area, intentionally isolated. Surrounded by forests and miles of open land, the prison sits far from major cities. This distance isn't accidental. Facilities like this are often built in remote regions to enhance security and limit outside interference. But Florida State Prison isn't alone. It's part of a larger correctional cluster that includes Union Correctional Institution and other facilities nearby, forming one of the most concentrated prison regions in the state. Within this complex lies Florida's male death row. And just steps away from it, the execution chamber. A place designed with a single purpose: to carry out death sentences ordered by the courts. A history built on control. The roots of Florida State Prison trace back to the early 20th century. Rayford became the center of Florida's prison system long before modern correctional standards existed. In its early years, conditions were harsh. Labor was demanding. And oversight was limited. Over time, reforms were introduced, especially during the mid to late 20th century, as legal challenges and public scrutiny forced changes in how prisons operated. But one part of the system remained constant: the death penalty. Florida has maintained capital punishment for decades, though its methods have evolved. Executions were historically carried out using the electric chair, famously known as Old Sparky. But after legal challenges and public controversy, Florida introduced lethal injection as the primary method in 2000. Still, the electric chair has never been fully removed as an option under specific legal conditions. And all of it, every execution, has been carried out here. Inside Florida State Prison. Entering the facility. Getting inside Florida State Prison is not simple. Access is tightly restricted. Every entry point is controlled through what's known as a sally port, a secure, double-gated system that ensures only one barrier opens at a time. Visitors, staff, and officials are all subject to screening. Metal detectors. Identification checks. Strict movement protocols. Once inside, movement is limited and monitored. Doors don't open freely. They unlock in sequence. And every step is observed either directly or through surveillance systems. Because inside a facility like this, control is everything. Especially when it houses inmates serving life sentences. And others waiting for execution. The structure of death row. Death row at Florida State Prison is not a single open space. It is a controlled, highly restricted housing unit, designed for isolation. Inmates are typically held in individual cells. Small. Enclosed. Separated from one another. Most of their day is spent alone. Meals are delivered through slots in the door. Movement is limited. Interaction is minimal. Unlike general population inmates, those on death row are not part of regular prison routines. Their lives operate under a different system, one defined by security, control, and legal process. Because for them, time is measured differently. Not by years served. But by appeals filed, decisions made, and dates that may, or may not, be set. Who ends up here? Not every inmate comes to Florida State Prison's death row. To be placed here, a person must be convicted of a capital offense, typically first-degree murder with aggravating factors defined under Florida law. And the sentence must be death. But that sentence does not come quickly. It follows a lengthy legal process. A trial. A conviction. A sentencing phase. And often, years of appeals. In fact, many inmates spend decades on death row before their cases are resolved. Some are eventually executed. Others have their sentences overturned. And in some cases, inmates die of natural causes before their execution date is ever set. Because once someone enters death row, the process is far from over. In many ways, it's just beginning. Life on death row. A day that never changes. On Florida's death row, routine is everything. Days follow a structured pattern, largely unchanged, day after day. Inmates typically wake early. There are no alarms. No schedules posted on the wall. Just the quiet understanding of a system that repeats itself. Meals are delivered directly to the cell. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. Each tray passed through a slot in the door, minimizing contact. Time outside the cell is limited. And for most of the day, inmates remain alone. This is not a temporary condition. For many, this routine continues for years. Sometimes decades. The cell. The physical space of a death row cell is minimal. Typically, the cell contains a bed, often a metal frame anchored to the wall, a thin mattress, a combined sink and toilet unit made of stainless steel, and little else. Personal property is limited. Inmates may be allowed certain approved items, such as legal papers, religious texts, or correspondence materials. But space is restricted. Every object is regulated. Every item accounted for. The design is intentional. Not for comfort, but for control. Isolation and silence. One of the defining features of death row is isolation. Inmates are housed separately. Direct interaction with other inmates is extremely limited. Communication, if it happens, is often indirect, through walls, through doors, or during controlled movement. Silence becomes a constant presence, broken only by routine checks, staff movement, or distant sounds within the facility. This level of isolation has been widely documented. Some reports describe psychological strain over time. Others emphasize the structured nature of the environment as a necessary security measure. The experience varies. But one fact remains consistent: life on death row is lived largely alone. Movement under control. Movement outside the cell is rare and tightly controlled. When an inmate leaves the cell, it's typically for specific reasons: medical visits, legal appointments, or limited recreation. But even then, the process is strict. Restraints are applied. Multiple officers may be present. Routes are controlled and monitored. There is no unsupervised movement. Every step is documented. Because within this system, security is non-negotiable. Recreation. Alone. Even time outside the cell is spent alone. Recreation, when permitted, usually takes place in individual enclosures. Small, secured spaces. Sometimes referred to as recreation cages. Inmates may spend a limited amount of time there, separate from others. No group activities. No shared interaction. Just a controlled environment, and a brief change of setting. For some, it's the only time they see the open sky directly. Even if it's through layers of fencing. Communication with the outside world. Contact with the outside world is limited, but not completely cut off. Inmates on death row may communicate through letters, approved phone calls, and scheduled visits. Visits are typically non-contact. Separated by glass. Monitored by staff. Legal communication is also a key part of life on death row. Many inmates continue to work with attorneys, filing appeals, reviewing case materials, and challenging their convictions or sentences. Because even after sentencing, the legal process continues. Sometimes for years. Sometimes for decades. Time and uncertainty. Time on death row is unpredictable. There is no fixed countdown. No guaranteed timeline. Some inmates remain on death row for decades. According to documented data, the average time between sentencing and execution in the United States often exceeds 10 years, and in many cases, far longer. Appeals can extend the process. Court rulings can delay it. And sometimes, sentences are overturned entirely. Which means that for many inmates, every day carries uncertainty. Not knowing if, or when, their case will reach its final outcome. The staff. Behind every aspect of death row operations, are correctional staff. Officers are responsible for security, supervision, and enforcing strict procedures. Their work is structured and regulated. Routine checks are conducted regularly. Interactions are professional and controlled. And every action, by both staff and inmates, is governed by established protocols. Working in this environment requires training, discipline, and consistency. Because the margin for error is extremely small. The difference with Death Watch. There is one phase of death row that is different from all others. Death Watch. This begins when an execution date is officially set. At this point, the inmate is moved to a separate area, closer to the execution chamber. Security increases. Monitoring becomes constant. Lights may remain on at all times, and staff maintain continuous observation. This is no longer an indefinite wait. This is a scheduled process, with a defined endpoint. And every step from this moment forward follows a precise timeline. The execution process. The final transfer. When an execution date is set, the process becomes highly structured. In the final phase, known as death watch, the inmate is transferred to a designated holding area near the execution chamber. This movement is conducted under strict supervision. Restraints are applied. Multiple officers are present. And every step is documented. From this point forward, procedures follow a precise timeline established by the Florida Department of Corrections. There are no deviations. Only protocol. The final 24 hours. In the final 24 hours before an execution, monitoring intensifies. The inmate is kept under constant observation. Staff members are assigned specifically to watch and document activity. Lights remain on. Movement is restricted. But during this time, certain allowances are made. The inmate may meet with legal counsel. They may receive visits from a spiritual advisor. And, depending on circumstances, a final meal may be requested, within established guidelines. Every interaction is recorded. Every step follows procedure. Because once the final day begins, there is no uncertainty left. The execution chamber. The execution chamber at Florida State Prison is designed with precision. It is not large, but it is carefully arranged. At the center is a gurney, where the inmate is secured. Nearby are medical components used in the lethal injection process. Adjacent to the chamber is a witness room, separated by glass. This is where authorized individuals observe the execution. Witnesses may include officials, media representatives, victims' family members, and the inmate's chosen witnesses. Every position in the room is deliberate. Every role is defined. Because this is not an improvised act. It is a formal procedure carried out under state authority. Lethal injection, the current method. Today, lethal injection is the primary method of execution in Florida. The procedure follows a sequence defined by state protocol. The inmate is secured to the gurney. Intravenous lines are established, typically in the arms, if possible. Once preparations are complete, the process begins. Florida uses a multi-drug protocol. While exact combinations have changed over time due to legal challenges and drug availability, the general sequence includes a sedative, to render the inmate unconscious, a paralytic agent, to stop muscle movement, and a drug that stops the heart. The administration is carried out by designated personnel. Once the process begins, it proceeds without interruption. A physician is present to confirm death, and the time is officially recorded. Old Sparky, the electric chair. Before lethal injection, executions in Florida were carried out using the electric chair, known as Old Sparky. It was used for decades. But over time, concerns were raised. Legal challenges questioned whether the method caused unnecessary suffering. In the late 1990s, several executions drew national attention after reports of visible complications. As a result, Florida transitioned to lethal injection as its primary method in 2000. However, the electric chair was not entirely removed. Under Florida law, inmates may still choose electrocution as an alternative method in certain circumstances. Today, it remains part of the state's legal framework, though it is rarely used. The final moments. In the final moments, the process is controlled and documented. Witnesses observe in silence. Officials follow protocol step by step. There are no dramatic announcements. No improvisation. Only a sequence of actions that has been defined in advance. Once death is confirmed, the procedure ends. The witnesses are escorted out. And official records are completed. For the state, the sentence has been carried out. For everyone involved, it marks the end of a process that often began years, or decades, earlier. After the execution. After an execution, procedures continue. The body is transferred according to established protocols, typically to a medical examiner. Documentation is finalized. And official statements may be released. In some cases, families, both of the victim and the inmate, are notified immediately. For the prison staff, operations return to routine. For the legal system, the case is closed. But outside the prison walls, the broader conversation often continues. About justice. About punishment. And about the role of the death penalty in modern society. Controversies, cases and the debate. Legal challenges to the death penalty. The death penalty in Florida has never existed without challenge. Over the years, it has faced repeated scrutiny in both state and federal courts. One of the most significant turning points came in 2016, when the Hurst v. Florida decision by the United States Supreme Court ruled that Florida's sentencing system was unconstitutional at the time. The issue centered on how death sentences were decided. Previously, judges, not juries, had the final authority in imposing a death sentence. The court ruled that this violated the Sixth Amendment. As a result, Florida was forced to revise its procedures. Now, juries must play a central role in determining whether a death sentence can be imposed. This case didn't end capital punishment in Florida, but it changed how it is applied. And it highlighted a broader reality, that even long-standing systems can be challenged and reshaped. Wrongful convictions. One of the most serious concerns surrounding the death penalty is the risk of wrongful conviction. In Florida, there have been documented cases where individuals sentenced to death were later exonerated. One widely reported example is Frank Lee Smith. He was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. Years later, DNA evidence, unavailable at the time of his trial, cast serious doubt on his guilt. Smith died of cancer while still on death row. After his death, the evidence led to his exoneration. Cases like this are rare, but they are real. And they have played a major role in shaping public debate. Because in a system where the punishment is irreversible, even a single error carries enormous weight. Lengthy appeals and delays. One of the defining features of death row is time. Not just time served, but time spent in the legal system. Appeals are a fundamental part of capital cases. They are designed to ensure that convictions are accurate and that procedures were properly followed. But this process can take years, often decades. Some critics argue that these delays prolong uncertainty for both victims' families and inmates. Others argue that the time is necessary because the stakes are higher than any other sentence. And once carried out, there is no reversal. Methods under scrutiny. The methods used in executions have also faced scrutiny. Lethal injection, while intended to be more clinical, has been challenged in courts across the United States. Questions have been raised about drug combinations, availability of substances, and whether the process meets constitutional standards. Florida has adjusted its protocols over time in response to these concerns. Similarly, the electric chair, once the primary method, became the subject of intense legal and public debate in the 1990s. These challenges have not eliminated executions, but they have shaped how they are carried out, and they continue to influence ongoing legal discussions. Public opinion. Public opinion on the death penalty is divided. Some believe it serves as justice for the most serious crimes. Others question its effectiveness and its fairness. In Florida, support for capital punishment has historically remained significant. But debates continue, centered on issues such as deterrence, cost, moral considerations, and the risk of wrongful convictions. These discussions extend beyond the prison walls, into courts, into legislatures, and into communities. Because the death penalty is not just a legal issue, it is a societal one. Notable executions. Over the years, Florida State Prison has been the site of numerous executions, each documented, each following official protocol. Some cases received national attention, often due to the nature of the crime or the legal issues involved. Media organizations are typically present outside the facility during executions, reporting on developments as they occur, but access remains limited. Most details come from official statements and witness accounts. Because inside the chamber, only a small number of people are ever allowed to see what happens. Life after death row, commutations and overturns. Not every death sentence ends in execution. In some cases, sentences are overturned. Courts may find errors in the trial, new evidence, or violations of legal procedure. When this happens, inmates may be removed from death row. Sometimes they are resentenced. In rare cases, they are released. These outcomes are not the majority, but they are a critical part of the system. A reminder that legal processes continue even after the most severe sentence is given. The bigger question. Florida State Prison is a place of final outcomes. But the questions surrounding it are far from settled. What defines justice? Can a system be both firm and flawless? And how should society respond to its most serious crimes? There are no simple answers. Only ongoing discussions, shaped by law, experience, and perspective. But one thing is certain. Behind the walls of this prison, every decision carries weight, and every outcome is permanent. If you made it this far, you've seen what few ever do, the reality behind one of the most controlled and final systems in the world. Inside Florida State Prison, every step is documented, every process defined, and every outcome carries weight that cannot be reversed. This isn't just a story about a prison. It's about law, accountability, and the decisions that shape lives, on both sides of the system. If you want more fully factual, deep dive documentaries like this, make sure to subscribe to Life Behind Bars and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Watch the next video on your screen now.